A grandmother's fight for justice. My daughter-in-law had gone to visit her mother, leaving my precious 7-year-old granddaughter Lucy in my care for a few days. I had lovingly prepared dinner, setting the table with all her favorite dishes, but when I called her to eat, she just sat there, frozen, staring at the plate before her as if it were something forbidden. My heart twisted with worry as I gently asked, "Sweetheart, why aren't you eating?" What she whispered next shattered my world into a million pieces. "Grandma, am I allowed to eat?" Those 5 words, so innocent, so heartbreaking, made my blood run cold. I tried to smile through the shock, my voice trembling as I said, "Of course you can eat, my darling, of course you can." The moment those words left my lips, my beautiful granddaughter collapsed into tears. Her tiny body shook with sobs that seemed too big for her small frame. "I'm so glad you're here, Grandma," she cried, her voice breaking my heart into pieces I didn't know could break. Before I continue, I need to pause here. If you're watching this, please, I'm begging you'll like and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I need to know how far this story of injustice and redemption has traveled. I need to know I'm not alone in this fight. I stood there in my humble kitchen, the comforting aroma of homemade chicken soup and fluffy white rice filling the air. The soft golden light from my old lamp cast warm shadows across the weathered wooden table where I had so carefully arranged our dinner. With my heart full of love, I called out in my gentlest voice, "Lucy, my angel, come here. Grandma's made your favorite dinner." From the living room, I heard the softest padding of little feet. Lucy entered the kitchen as if she were walking through a minefield. Each step deliberate and cautious, weighted down by invisible chains. She pulled out her chair with such care that the sound was barely a whisper against the old, wooden floor. My heart clenched when I looked at her. Lucy was only 7 years old, but her enormous eyes, those beautiful, haunted eyes, carried a sorrow that no child should ever know. They held secrets too heavy for such a fragile soul to bear. I ladled a generous bowl of steaming soup and placed it before her, the rich aroma of chicken and garden vegetables rising between us. I added several slices of warm cornbread, her absolute favorite, remembering how she used to squeal with delight at the sight of it. But now, Lucy sat rigidly in her chair, her tiny hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes locked on the food but not daring to touch it. Something was desperately wrong. I could feel it in my bones. "Go ahead, sweetheart," I urged softly, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Eat while it's still warm." Silence, deafening, suffocating silence. Lucy picked up her spoon with trembling fingers, but she just held it suspended in the air, as if some invisible force was holding her back. I slid the plate of cornbread closer to her, my voice tender with encouragement. "You love dipping your cornbread in the soup, remember? Please, darling, eat something." I desperately hoped my voice would break through whatever wall had been built around her. Then, without warning, Lucy's small shoulders began to shake. She lifted her face to mine, and I saw tears pooling in those enormous eye stares that hadn't yet fallen but threatened to overflow. In a voice so small I could barely hear it, so fragile it nearly broke me, she whispered, "Grandma, ... am I allowed to eat today?" That question, that impossible, devastating question, felt like a dagger plunging straight through my heart. I stood frozen, a smile still plastered on my face while my mind screamed in anguish. Permission to eat? How could any child, any precious 7-year-old baby, be forced to ask such a thing? I fought desperately to maintain my composure. I nodded firmly, pouring every ounce of love I possessed into my words. "Of course you can eat, Lucy. You never have to ask permission here. The food is here for you, my darling. Please eat." But the moment those words escaped my lips, the dam burst. Tears flooded down her cheeks in rivers of pain. Her fragile shoulders convulsed with sobs that seemed to tear her apart from the inside. I reached out to comfort her, placing my hand gently on her trembling shoulder, but Lucy completely broke down. Her cries were heart-wrenching, each sob a knife wound to my soul. The spoon clattered from her tiny hands, hitting the table with a sound that echoed through my chest like a death knell. "Lucy, sweetheart, what's wrong?" I pleaded, my own voice cracking with desperation. "Please tell Grandma what's wrong." But she couldn't answer. She could only cry deep, gasping sobs that clutched at my very soul. I pulled my chair close to hers and began feeding her myself, spoon by gentle spoon, bringing the warm soup to her trembling lips. Lucy continued to sob, tears streaming down her face and soaking through the napkin I used to tenderly wipe her cheeks. I forced myself to smile, to say cheerful things through my own breaking heart. It's delicious, isn't it? Grandma makes the best chicken soup, doesn't she? But deep in my soul, in that place where mothers and grandmothers know things without being told, I understood that something was terribly, horribly wrong. After clearing away the dishes with shaking hands, I glanced back at Lucy. She remained hunched in her chair like a wounded bird, her arms wrapped tightly around her small body, wiping away tears with the backs of her tiny hands. The sight was unbearable, absolutely unbearable. I guided her gently to the living room and turned on one of those cheerful children's shows, hoping the bright colors and happy music would bring some light back to her eyes. But Lucy just curled up in the corner of the couch, clutching a pillow to her chest, as if it were her only shield against the world. She kept glancing at me with those worried eyes, as if she feared something I couldn't yet comprehend. I poured a glass of warm milk and placed it on the coffee table before her, my voice soft and encouraging. "Drink your milk, sweetheart. It will make you feel better." But Lucy didn't reach for the glass immediately. Instead, she stared at it, then looked up at me, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Grandma, can I drink it?" This time, I couldn't hide my shock. My hands trembled as I nodded, fighting back the pain that squeezed my chest like a vice. "Of course, my angel, of course you can drink it." Only then did Lucy dare to take the glass, drinking in the smallest sips, holding it with both hands as if someone might snatch it away from her at any moment. When night descended, I prepared Lucy for bed. She meticulously arranged her blanket and pillow on the small bed in the living room, every fold perfect, every corner precise, but she didn't lie down. She just stood there, her big round eyes fixed on me, clearly waiting for permission. "It's time to sleep now, my love," I whispered in the softest voice I could manage. "It's late." But Lucy remained motionless. And then came another question that froze the blood in my veins. "Grandma, can I turn off the light now?" That question chilled me to my very core. I walked over, switched off the light with trembling fingers, and lay down beside her tiny body. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her small frame still trembling in the darkness. I heard Lucy's soft, shuddering sigh, a sound far too old for such a young soul. I stroked her hair, trying desperately to comfort her, to let her know she was safe. But even after she had fallen into an exhausted sleep, her eyelashes were still damp with tears under the faint light filtering through the window. Watching her sleep, my heart shattered into pieces, and memories came flooding back, memories of happier times that now felt like cruel mockery. Thought the before times. I can still picture Maria, my first daughter-in-law, standing in her sunny kitchen, her skilled hands dancing as she prepared the most delicious paella. Maria always wore the gentlest smile, like a ray of pure sunshine that illuminated our entire family. She would regularly bring food to my house, always setting aside the best portions for my son Anthony. "Mom, I made a little extra just for you," she would say in that soft voice of hers. "I made it spicy, just the way you like it." I used to joke that Maria was heaven's gift to our family. Back then, Lucy was just learning to walk, refusing to let go of her mother's skirt for even a moment, repeating "Mama, Mama" in that precious, childish voice. Watching them together, so close and so loving, I truly believed that happiness would last forever. But life has a cruel way of destroying the things we love most. When Lucy turned to Maria, discovered a lump in her breast. I'll never forget the day she called me, her voice shaking even as she tried to sound brave. "Mom, I went to the doctor, and he found something. But please don't worry, I'm sure it's nothing serious." I tried to calm her and myself, but deep in my heart, I just knew, our entire family threw ourselves into the battle against that monster called cancer. We ran from hospital to hospital, clinging desperately to every fragile thread of hope. Anthony sold his most treasured possession, his beloved car, to pay the crushing medical bills. I spent countless days and sleepless nights praying at St. Michael's Church, lighting candle after candle, begging God with every fiber of my being to save my daughter-in-law. But cancer is a ruthless, merciless enemy. It stole Maria from us just before Lucy's 5th birthday. The night Maria passed away, I stood in that cold hospital hallway, watching Anthony clutch Lucy to his chest with desperate strength, crying until there were no more tears left in his body. The little girl was far too young to understand what was happening. She could only cling to her father's shirt and ask in that heartbreaking, innocent voice, "Where's Mommy, Daddy? Where did Mommy go?" I had to turn away. I couldn't bear to look into those innocent eyes because I had no answer that wouldn't destroy her world completely. My heart felt shattered not just from losing Maria, but because I understood with terrible certainty that Lucy's life would never, ever be the same. A father's struggle. Anthony became a single father overnight. His demanding job as a construction supervisor meant constant travels, sometimes disappearing for an entire week without coming home. I suggested repeatedly that Lucy should stay with me, but Anthony always shook his head stubbornly. "Mom, I need to take care of my daughter myself," he would say with fierce determination. "I don't want Lucy growing up without her father." I understood his feelings, of course I did, but every time I saw Lucy sitting silently by the window, watching and waiting for her father to return, my heart broke all over again. I started visiting Anthony's house more frequently. I would bring home-cooked meals, tell Lucy stories from my childhood, and teach her how to fold colorful paper flowers to hang in her room. Lucy still had that bright smile, though sometimes, just sometimes, I would catch a glimpse of deep sadness flickering in her eyes. 2 long years passed, and I began noticing changes in Anthony. He spoke less and less, and a constant weariness seemed to weigh down his every movement. Then one afternoon, he called me, and his voice was filled with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, I met someone in Toledo. Her name is Isabel. She's a widow, and she's truly wonderful. I really think she'll get along beautifully with Lucy." I wanted to be happy for my son, I truly did, but deep down, a cold knot of worry began forming in my stomach. Lucy had already lost her mother in the most devastating way. Would she be ready to accept a new one? The perfect mask. The first time I met Isabel, I was genuinely impressed by her charm and grace. She arrived at our home carrying a beautiful homemade flan, golden and fragrant, still warm from the oven. She smiled warmly, and in front of everyone, she immediately embraced Lucy. "She's absolutely adorable," Isabel cooed in a honey-sweet voice, looking directly at me. "I already love her, as if she were my own daughter." In that moment, Lucy pressed herself against my side. She barely nodded, silent as a shadow, but Isabel didn't seem to notice, or perhaps she chose not to. She continued chatting with me enthusiastically, telling stories about her life in Toledo, describing the dishes she loved to cook, and sharing her dream of creating a happy, complete family. Anthony stood beside her, his eyes shining with a hope I hadn't seen since before Maria's illness. Seeing my son like that, seeing him finally find light after so much darkness, I told myself that perhaps Isabel truly would be the one to bring happiness back to our broken family. 6 months later, Anthony and Isabel married. They moved into a charming little house in the Phoenix suburbs, white walls, red-tiled roof, surrounded by flowers. I visited them on moving day and watched Lucy running in the yard with a ball in her hands, her laughter floating on the breeze. Isabel was busy unpacking boxes, but she paused to stroke Lucy's hair and say with apparent tenderness, "Be careful playing, sweetheart. Don't fall and hurt yourself." I thought everything was going to be fine. I convinced myself that Lucy would gradually adjust to her new mother. But then everything changed when Isabel became pregnant. The shift when Isabel gave birth to David, a healthy, beautiful baby boy. Our entire family overflowed with joy. Anthony called me, his voice trembling with emotion. "Mom, David looks so much like Maria. He has the same big, round eyes." I visited them bearing a wool blanket I had lovingly knitted for my new grandson. Isabel held David with a radiant, glowing smile, while Lucy stood quietly in the corner, watching silently as everyone fussed over her baby brother. I called her over, my voice warm and inviting. "Lucy, come give your little brother a hug." But the little girl just nodded mechanically and walked away in silence, clutching her worn rag doll tightly against her chest. As time marched forward, I began noticing subtle changes, small cracks in the perfect facade. Whenever I called, Isabel would answer cheerfully, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Lucy is being such a good girl. She absolutely adores playing with David." But when I actually visited them, I saw a different truth. Lucy spoke less and less. She no longer ran and laughed like the child she used to be. Instead, she sat in corners, silent and still, her gaze distant and empty. Isabel always greeted me with elaborate kindness. The table would be laden with food-rich stews, crisp fresh salads, golden caramel flan. She would often drape an arm around Lucy's shoulders and call her my love in that tender voice. But whenever I looked away, I noticed Lucy would lower her head and clench her small hands into tight fists. I kept reassuring myself, finding excuses for what I was seeing. "It's just the shyness of a child who lost her mother too young." I would think maybe Lucy just needs more time to adjust to Isabel. She just needs patience and love. But deep in my soul, an unsettling feeling continued to grow, spreading like poison through my veins. The facade deepens in the months following Anthony and Isabel's wedding. I visited their new suburban house regularly. It was truly lovely, a beautiful two-story home with pristine white walls, and that charming red-tiled roof peeking out from under the shade of blooming bougainvillea. Every time I walked through that gate, I felt embraced by warmth, as if this place would finally become the safe haven my son and granddaughter deserved after enduring so much pain. But looking back now, with the clarity of hindsight, I realized that warmth was nothing but an illusion, a carefully constructed lie, and I had been far too naive, far too trusting, to see the cracks that were slowly spreading beneath the surface. The first time I visited after they moved in, I stood at the gate holding a bag of fresh oranges I had picked from my own garden. Isabel came to open the door, wearing an apron dusted with flour, with Lucy perched on her hip. Her smile was brilliant, like summer sunshine. "Come in, Mom, I'm baking a pie for the family," she announced enthusiastically. Lucy was nestled against her shoulder, her big round eyes looking at me, but she said nothing. I stroked her soft hair and smiled warmly. "Grandma brought you sweet oranges, darling." The little girl nodded, but her smile was so faint, so mechanical, as if she was only trying to please me. Going through the motions of what was expected, the table that day was set with such meticulous care that I couldn't help but feel impressed. A steaming, fragrant stew sat proudly in the center. Beside it, a fresh salad of thinly sliced tomatoes and cucumbers glistened, and as a special treat, a golden, glossy caramel flan was placed right in the middle, the undisputed star of the meal. Isabel never stopped serving everyone. She refilled Anthony's wineglass before it was empty, piled more meat onto Lucy's plate, and said in that loving voice, "Lucy adores stew, don't you, sweetheart?" Then she would pat Lucy's shoulder and add sweetly, "Eat lots, my love." Lucy just nodded obediently. She took a small spoonful and chewed slowly, mechanically, never lifting her eyes from her plate. Anthony sat across from them, his eyes filled with a happiness I hadn't witnessed since Maria's death. He took Isabel's hand tenderly, turned to me with pride shining in his face, and declared, "Isabel takes care of everyone with such incredible love. Mom, I feel so blessed to have found her." Seeing them all together like that, seeing my son's joy, my heart finally felt at peace. I genuinely believed that Lucy had found a new mother who would love and protect her just as Maria had done. I believed it with every fiber of my being. From time to time, Isabel would bring Lucy to visit me on weekends. She always arrived carrying a basket of fresh rolls or a jar of homemade orange marmalade, her smile wide and welcoming. "Mom, I made some marmalade especially for you," she would say warmly. "Please taste it and tell me if you like it." The neighbors couldn't stop singing her praises. "Your daughter-in-law is so dedicated and thoughtful," they would tell me. "She always greets everyone so politely." Mrs. Miller, who lived next door, even commented enthusiastically, "Isabel is such a wonderful woman. I always see her carrying Lucy around, taking care of her as lovingly as if she were her own biological daughter." Hearing those glowing words, my confidence in Isabel grew stronger with each passing day. I convinced myself that I had done the right thing by encouraging Anthony to marry her, that Lucy was receiving genuine love in her new home. But over time, during my visits, I began noticing disturbing differences. Lucy smiled less and less frequently. Before, she would excitedly tell me elaborate stories about her dolls or proudly show me her messy, colorful drawings. But now, she remained silent, her gaze distant and empty, as if she were trapped in a world I couldn't reach, no matter how hard I tried. The warning sign. During lunch, Anthony and Isabel chatted animatedly about work and their exciting weekend plans. Isabel laughed loudly, telling me she had just bought an expensive new toy for David, who was sleeping peacefully in his bassinet nearby. But Lucy just sat there motionless, moving her spoon absently through her soup without eating, without speaking. I grew worried. I placed my hand gently over hers and asked in a low, concerned voice, "Lucy, sweetheart, is the soup not good? Would you like Grandma to get you some meat instead?" The little girl looked up, startled, a slight jolt of fear in her eyes. Then she quickly shook her head. "No, it's good, Grandma," she whispered. But her voice was barely audible, a faint whisper, as if she was desperately trying to hide something painful. I looked at Isabel questioningly. She just smiled dismissively and replied in that gentle, logical tone, "She must be missing Maria still." It's just a normal thing for children. Mom, she'll get used to David and me eventually. These things take time. Isabel's words sounded so reasonable, so understanding, and I nodded, deceiving myself with the same comfortable explanation. Of course, I thought, Lucy is just missing her mother. She just needs more time to adjust to her new family. The breaking point one suffocatingly hot June afternoon. I was sitting on my porch fanning myself with a paper fan when the phone rang, shattering the quiet. It was Anthony, and my son's voice sounded rushed, tinged with worry. Mom, Isabel and I have to travel to Toledo urgently this weekend. We're taking David with us, but it's not really convenient to bring Lucy along. Could you possibly watch her for a few days? My heart felt suddenly lighter, as if I had been given a precious, unexpected gift. Of course, son, I'm always ready to take care of Lucy, I replied immediately, trying to hide the secret joy bubbling up inside me at the thought of spending quality time with my granddaughter. The next morning, as the first golden rays of sunlight streamed through my window, I heard Anthony's familiar car horn. I rushed out to the gate and saw my son's old car parked in front of my house. Anthony opened the door and gently helped Lucy out while Isabel carried David, who was yawning widely in his mother's arms. Lucy was wearing a pink backpack decorated with princess drawings. She clung to her father's side, her eyes fixed firmly on her little white shoes. Isabel approached, handed me a bag with neatly folded clothes, and smiled that perfect smile. Mom, here are Lucy's clothes. Please remember to give her warm milk before bed. And don't forget, she tends to forget to put on her jacket when she goes outside. Every word she spoke dripped with apparent care, painting the picture of a devoted, loving mother. I nodded and smiled back. Thank you, dear. I'll take wonderful care of Lucy. But when I bent down to hug Lucy, I felt the unmistakable stiffness in her tiny body. The little girl forced a smile, but her lips trembled as if that smile were just a fragile mask, desperately hiding deep, paralyzing fear. I gently squeezed her hand, and a strange, unexplainable feeling rose within me, a mother's intuition that something was terribly, desperately wrong. Anthony stroked her hair tenderly, his voice soft with affection. Be a good girl with Grandma, sweetheart. Daddy will be back very soon. Isabel also bent down, embracing Lucy, while whispering, Listen to Grandma, my girl, be good. But when she turned to secure David into the car, I caught a glimpse of something in Lucy's eyes, a flash of relief, of panic lifting, as if she had just been freed from an invisible, crushing burden. When the car finally disappeared down the street, I took Lucy's small hand and led her into my house. The little girl placed her backpack neatly beside a chair with surprising precision, took off her shoes, and aligned them perfectly in the corner. Level of control and carefulness that shocked me. I turned on the children's channel on my old TV, desperately hoping the cheerful songs and bright colors would lift her spirits, but Lucy just remained silent on the couch, hugging a cushion tightly against her chest, her gaze fixed on the floor tiles as if she were trapped in a world I couldn't access no matter how hard I tried. Would you like to watch something else, Lucy? I asked gently, trying to coax her into conversation. The little girl shook her head and answered in the smallest voice imaginable. This is fine, Grandma. The truth emerges at lunchtime. I went into the kitchen and prepared chicken soup with fluffy white rice dishes Lucy used to absolutely adore. The comforting aroma of chicken stewed with fresh vegetables filled every corner of my home. I served a generous, steaming bowl for my granddaughter and carefully placed it before her. Eat up, my love. Grandma cooked this especially for you, I said, fighting to maintain a cheerful tone, even as worry gnawed at my heart. But Lucy just picked up the spoon and sat frozen, her eyes locked on the soup as if she were doubting her own right to eat it. I pulled up a chair and sat beside her, encouraging her as gently as I could. Eat, sweetheart. It doesn't taste nearly as good when it gets cold. The little girl looked at me, her lips moving as if she desperately wanted to say something, but she remained locked in silence. I placed a piece of tender chicken on her plate and smiled encouragingly. Try this, darling. It's very tasty. Only then did Lucy dare to bring a small, cautious spoonful to her mouth, chewing with agonizing slowness, her eyes tense and fearful as if each bite were a dangerous challenge. She might fail. I watched her, and an inexplicable unease washed over me in waves. She must just miss her home, I repeated to myself like a mantra, desperately trying to chase away the growing feeling of dread. She's just not used to being here yet. But deep in my soul, I knew something was terribly, horribly wrong. And that very night, The question that had been tormenting me finally found its devastating answer. The next morning, the first gentle rays of sunlight filtered through my window and illuminated my small, cozy kitchen. I rose early to prepare a simple but loving breakfast: slices of golden toast with olive oil and crushed tomatoes, accompanied by a glass of warm, fragrant milk. That aroma used to make Lucy's face light up with joy. But that morning, when I called out tenderly, "Lucy, come eat breakfast, sweetheart," the little girl emerged from the living room in complete silence, her small steps slow and heavy, carrying an invisible weight far too great for such a young child. Lucy sat down at the table, her hands resting obediently in her lap, her gaze fixed on the old wooden surface, as if the answers to all her pain were written there. I brought the plate of toast closer and smiled warmly. "Eat up, my love. You also have warm milk. Grandma made it just the way you like it, with a touch of honey." But she didn't touch anything. She picked up a slice of bread and stopped completely, whispering in a low, trembling voice that shattered my heart, "Grandma, can I eat this?" That question, so simple yet so devastating, pierced my heart like a dagger wrapped in barbed wire. I felt shock course through my body, but I answered with all the tenderness I could summon, "Of course, my precious girl, of course you can eat. Grandma made this especially for you." Only then did Lucy dare to take the smallest bite, chewing with excruciating slowness, her gaze fixed on the table as if she were terrified of making some terrible mistake. As I poured more milk into her glass, the little girl looked up and asked with a trembling, uncertain voice, "Grandma, can I have more?" I nodded, but inside me, a violent storm was brewing. Why would a 7-year-old child have to ask permission to eat, to drink, as if the most basic necessities of life were privileges to be earned rather than rights to be claimed? I watched her, my heart breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. She drank in tiny, careful sips, hugging the cup tightly with both hands, as if she were afraid someone would violently snatch it away from her. That image left a painful lump lodged in my throat. I wanted desperately to embrace her, to tell her she didn't have to be afraid here in my home. But I understood that mere words wouldn't be enough to heal whatever wounds had been carved into her soul. After breakfast, I took her small hand and walked her to school. We passed through the small neighborhood park, the street bustling with the morning rush, flower vendors pushing their colorful carts, the mouth-watering aroma of fresh donuts floating from the shop on the corner. Lucy walked beside me with short, cautious steps, always clinging to me as if she were terrified of getting lost or left behind. I stopped in front of the donut shop and bought a warm paper bag full of treats, then handed it to her with a smile. "Here, my love, take one and enjoy it." But Lucy just hugged the paper bag without daring to open it, as if it might burn her. I was genuinely surprised and encouraged her gently. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Warm donuts are absolutely delicious." The little girl looked at me with doubt swimming in her eyes, and only after a long, painful moment did she dare to take a small piece, chewing slowly as if she were doing something incredibly serious and important. When we arrived at the school, I handed Lucy over to the teacher, watching as her classmates ran and laughed joyfully in the playground. I hoped desperately that Lucy would join them, that she would remember how to be a carefree child, but the little girl just stood pressed against the wall, watching in painful silence. Her big eyes no longer sparkled with the joy and innocence I remembered. Instead, they harbored a deep, unfathomable sadness that no child should ever carry. I stood there watching her from a distance, my heart impossibly heavy, feeling like I was carrying the weight of the world. She must just be missing home, I told myself desperately. But deep down, I knew with absolute certainty that wasn't the real reason at all. Uncovering the horror in the afternoon, when I picked Lucy up from school, I tried desperately to make cheerful conversation to distract her from whatever darkness haunted her. "Did you have fun in class today, sweetheart? Did you play with any friends?" The little girl answered in a barely audible voice, "Yes, Grandma." But her eyes remained empty, hollow, as if the answer was simply what she thought I wanted to hear rather than any reflection of truth. I took her hand and was shocked to find it ice. Even though the day was still pleasantly warm, on the way home, I stopped and bought her a bright red, heart-shaped balloon, thinking it might bring some light back to her eyes. But when I gave it to her, Lucy just took it carefully, looked at me with those haunted eyes, and asked in a voice that broke me completely, "Grandma, can I keep it?" I nodded, even though I felt something crushing my chest, making it hard to breathe. A simple balloon, such a tiny, insignificant joy, and still she felt she had to ask permission to keep it. In the evening, I spread crayons and paper across the kitchen table, desperately hoping to awaken some spark of her lost innocence. Draw something for Grandma, sweetheart. You used to love drawing so much. I encouraged her, remembering the beautiful, colorful drawings she used to proudly present to me. But Lucy just picked up a crayon, hesitated with it, hovering over the paper, and then asked with heartbreaking uncertainty, "Grandma, can I draw?" I nodded, barely holding back the crushing sadness that was consuming me from the inside out. "Of course you can draw, my darling. Draw anything your heart wants." Lucy began to draw slowly, carefully, as if each stroke might be judged and found wanting. A picture gradually appeared on the paper: a man, a woman, and a small boy. I leaned in closer and asked gently, "Who are they, honey?" Lucy hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "That's Daddy and Mummy, Isabel, and David." I stroked her head, feigning cheerfulness, even as my heart crumbled. "That's lovely, sweetheart, but why don't you draw yourself too? The family would look so much prettier with you in it." But she didn't answer. She just lowered her head, and tears began filling her eyes, falling silently down her pale cheeks like raindrops of pure grief. Seeing her like that absolutely broke me. I pulled Lucy close to my chest and felt her small body trembling violently. "Are you okay, Lucy? Please, tell Grandma what's wrong," I begged urgently, but the little girl just shook her head and squeezed my hand with desperate strength, as if she were holding a secret far too enormous, too terrifying, to share with anyone. I stroked her hair as an indescribable pain washed over me in devastating waves. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that something horrible was happening to my granddaughter. But I still didn't have the courage to face the full, ugly truth. At night, I cooked a rich southern fish stew, her absolute favorite dish, before this nightmare began. I served a generous, steaming portion and placed it before her, smiling through my pain. "Try it, sweetheart. Grandma made it exactly the way you used to love it." But Lucy picked up the spoon and immediately put it down, murmuring with genuine fear in her voice, "What if I spill it, Grandma?" That question sent ice through my veins. I answered as gently as I could manage, "If you spill it, we'll simply clean it up together. It's perfectly okay to make mistakes, darling." The little girl looked at me for what felt like an eternity, as if desperately trying to determine whether I was telling the truth or setting some kind of trap. Only then did she dare to try a small, cautious spoonful, eating with agonizing slowness, never once taking her eyes off the plate. When she finished, Lucy stood up by herself and carefully washed her dishes, arranging them in the dish rack with military precision, all without me saying a single word. Watching her perform these tasks with such fearful caution felt like someone had placed a crushing stone directly on my chest. Before going to bed, Lucy folded her own blanket and pillow with perfect precision. Then she sat up rigidly on the bed, looked at me with those haunted eyes, and asked the question that nearly destroyed me. "Grandma, can I go to sleep now?" I nodded, though my heart was breaking into dust. "Go to sleep, my angel. Grandma is right here with you. I won't leave you," I said, desperately trying to sound calm, even as I was falling apart inside. The little girl lay down, turned her back to me, and released a soft sigh, as if finally releasing some enormous weight she had been forced to carry alone. I stayed by her side, gently stroking her hair, as I watched her sleeping face, feeling the pain tear me apart from the inside. My precious granddaughter, what had they done to her? A Sunday revelation. On that Sunday, soft sunlight filtered through the red bougainvillea that covered my brick-paved patio. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, as if trying to calm my restless, tormented soul. After the days of watching fear embedded in Lucy's every gesture, every breath, I decided to take my granddaughter out to the patio, praying that the fresh air and gentle sunlight would help her finally open up to me. I brought out 2 glasses of cold, freshly squeezed orange juice. I placed the glass before Lucy and smiled with all the warmth I could muster. "Here, sweetheart. Grandma squeezed fresh oranges just for you. It's very sweet." The little girl took the glass carefully with both hands, took only the smallest sip, and then set it down on the table with a cautious, fearful look, as if she were waiting for punishment to descend. I sat beside her, trying desperately to keep my voice as soft and unthreatening as possible. "Lucy, my darling, you can be completely yourself here. You never have to ask permission for anything. If you want to drink, drink. If you want to play, play. If you want to laugh and run and be a child, please do. Okay, sweetheart." The little girl nodded obediently, but remained locked in silence, clutching the glass as if someone might violently snatch it away at any moment. Seeing her like that made my chest physically ache with unbearable pain. I stood up, retrieved a box of cookies from the kitchen, placed it on the table, and said gently, "Have a cookie, my love." Grandma bought the kind you used to enjoy so much. Lucy reached for a cookie with trembling fingers, but suddenly her eyes flooded with tears that spilled down her cheeks. I was shocked, leaning toward her urgently. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Please tell Grandma what's wrong." The little girl pressed her lips together tightly. Tears streamed down her face in rivers of pain. Her voice was trembling, barely a whisper that echoed through my soul. "Grandma, if I'm not good, they don't let me eat." Those words were like a sharp knife plunging straight through my heart, twisting viciously. I was completely paralyzed, unable to believe what I was hearing. I squeezed her tiny hand desperately, pleading, "Lucy, please tell me everything that happens at home. Don't be afraid. Grandma is here with you. I will protect you." Lucy burst into broken, devastating sobs that shook her entire body. She threw herself into my arms, her voice trembling with terror and relief. "Mommy Isabel. She makes me wash all the dishes and clean the whole house. If I make even a small mistake, she punishes me by not letting me have dinner. One day she made this beautiful pagella. It smelled so good, Grandma, but she only let me watch while everyone else ate. I was so hungry. It hurt." Each word from my granddaughter was another devastating blow, sinking deep into my soul, tearing it to shreds. I hugged her with all my strength, feeling her small body trembling violently in my arms like a frightened bird. "What else, my darling? Please tell Grandma everything," I urged, trying desperately to stay calm even though I was boiling with pure, volcanic rage inside. The little girl sobbed harder, her tears soaking through my clothes. Mommy also locks me in a dark room when I break something, even by accident. I'm so scared, Grandma. It's so dark in there, and I'm all alone. I cry and cry, but nobody comes. David always gets candy and toys. Mummy holds him and kisses him and tells him how much she loves him. But if I want to eat anything, I have to ask for permission first. And even when I ask, even when I'm so polite, Mommy usually doesn't let me. My heart completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The image of Lucy, my precious 7-year-old granddaughter, locked in a dark room, denied food for breaking a glass, abandoned and terrified and alone. It left me absolutely breathless, unable to draw air into my lungs. I stroked her hair with trembling hands, desperately trying to console her. "It's okay now, my precious love. You're safe here with Grandma. Nobody will ever scare you again. I promise you, I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, nobody will hurt you ever again." But Lucy kept crying, clinging desperately to the sleeve of my shirt, her voice trembling with terror. "Grandma, I'm so scared to go back home. Please don't make me go back. Please, Grandma, please." I held her for what felt like hours, stroking her gently, whispering words of comfort and love until she gradually stopped crying. When I finally asked her, my voice barely steady, "Have you told your daddy about any of this?" Lucy shook her head violently from side to side, her eyes red and swollen. "Daddy wouldn't believe me, Grandma. When he's around, Mommy Isabel is always so nice. She calls me my little girl and hugs me and smiles. Daddy only sees that Mommy is good to me. He doesn't see what happens when he's gone." Those words were the final, crushing blow that made me understand with perfect, horrifying clarity that Isabel had built a mask so perfect, so flawless, that even my own son couldn't see through it. I squeezed Lucy's hand and made her the most solemn promise of my entire life. "You are completely safe here, my darling. Grandma will never, ever let anyone hurt you again. Do you understand? Never again. I promise you." Building her trusting. The afternoon, I tried my very best to distract my traumatized granddaughter. I took Lucy out to the patio and showed her how to gently water the small potted plants I had lovingly cultivated myself. The little girl held the watering can with extreme care, moving step by cautious step, but in her eyes there remained an impossible-to-erase sadness that broke my heart all over again. I told her stories from my own childhood in a small town near Phoenix, where I used to run freely under the ancient olive trees, feeling the sun on my face and the wind in my hair. Lucy listened attentively, sometimes nodding, but that beautiful smile I remembered still refused to appear. I knew with painful certainty that the wounds carved into her heart couldn't be healed with just a few nostalgic stories. At night, I cooked fried rice with colorful vegetables and tender made a simple but vibrant, cheerful dish. When I placed the bowl before Lucy, I smiled with genuine warmth. "Eat, my honey, eat it with real gusto." For the first time in several days, the little girl didn't ask for permission. She took a spoonful of rice, ate it slowly, and then looked up at me with eyes that were just a tiny bit brighter, the faintest glimmer of hope beginning to peek through. After finishing her entire bowl, Lucy asked timidly, her voice soft but no longer quite so terrified, "Grandma, can I have seconds?" I nodded enthusiastically, my heart overflowing with a powerful mix of joy and lingering pain. I served her another generous bowl, watching as she ate more confidently. My granddaughter was beginning to feel safe again, but I understood that the fear was still buried deep in her wounded soul. Before going to bed, Lucy folded her blankets by herself with that same careful precision, sat on the bed, and looked at me with softer, less haunted eyes. She whispered, and I heard the wonder in her voice, "Grandma, I wasn't afraid to eat anymore." That simple sentence made me want to laugh and cry simultaneously. Tears rolled silently down my cheeks as I tucked her in and stroked her hair with infinite tenderness. "Sleep well, my precious love. Grandma will always, always be here with you. You're not alone anymore." Lucy nodded, closed her eyes, and for the first time since she had arrived, I saw her drift off to sleep with the smallest, most beautiful smile gracing her lips. Gathering evidence after Lucy's heartbreaking confession, I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't stand by and do nothing. I understood that if I didn't take action immediately, my granddaughter's pain would be buried forever under Isabel's perfect, poisonous facade. On Monday morning, I woke up early and prepared breakfast for Lucy, as usual. As I watched her bring small spoonfuls of oatmeal to her mouth, still with lingering traces of distrust in her eyes, I clenched my hands tightly under the table and made my final decision. I had to uncover the full truth, no matter what it cost me. After dropping Lucy off at school, I stood at the gate, watching her walk into class with that quiet, withdrawn air, not mingling with the other children who were playing and laughing. Then I turned with fierce determination and took the first bus to the neighborhood where Anthony's family lived. It was a quiet, tree-lined street with two-story houses standing one next to the other, balconies covered with vibrant red bougainvillea. The sweet scent of flowers filled the air, but it couldn't calm the raging storm inside me. I stopped in front of Mrs. Miller's house. She was a widow in her 60s who spent most days sitting on her porch embroidering. Mrs. Miller was always completely up to date on everything happening in the neighborhood, and I desperately hoped she could give me the answers I needed. I knocked on her door, and Mrs. Miller emerged, her eyes narrowing curiously when she saw me standing there. "Mrs. Johnson, I haven't seen you in quite a while," she said in a friendly but somewhat curious tone. I smiled, trying desperately to stay calm, and went straight to the point. "Mrs. Miller, I need to ask you about Lucy, my granddaughter. Have you seen anything unusual at Anthony's house? Anything at all that seemed wrong?" When she heard Lucy's name, her friendly expression immediately darkened. She took my arm gently and, lowering her voice as if she feared someone might overhear us, she said urgently, "Mrs. Johnson, I saw Isabel punishing that poor little girl in the yard. Once she dropped a plate, just a simple accident, and Isabel made her kneel under the brutal midday sun. She wouldn't let her get up for hours, even though the child was crying and begging. It was absolutely heartbreaking to witness." Mrs. Miller's words hit me like a violent punch to my chest. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms, desperately trying to contain the volcanic rage rising inside me. "Is there anything else, Mrs. Miller? Please, anything you remember." She sighed deeply, looking toward the empty street with profound sadness in her eyes. "Many, many times I wanted to intervene, Mrs. Johnson, but Isabel always kept that gate locked tight. She wouldn't let anyone get close to that house. Once I gathered my courage and knocked on the door to ask about Lucy's well-being, and Isabel screamed at me to mind my own business. But Mrs. Johnson, I saw the look in that little girl's eyes. It wasn't the look of an innocent, happy child. It was the look of someone who had been broken. I thanked her with a heart that felt impossibly heavy, as if I were carrying massive stones crushing my chest. The image of Lucy kneeling under the scorching sun, crying and begging for mercy, tore my soul completely apart. I left Mrs. Miller's house and went straight to St. Michael's Church, where Anthony's family attended every Sunday. The church stood at the end of the street with its weathered stone walls and the solemn echo of bells. I searched for Father Michael, the elderly priest with completely white hair who had witnessed so many stories of joy and sorrow in this neighborhood. I found him carefully arranging holy books in a quiet corner. He looked up when he noticed me. "Mrs. Johnson, it's been quite some time since you've been here. Is something troubling you?" I sat down heavily on the worn wooden bench and told him everything what Lucy had confessed, what Mrs. Miller had witnessed. I asked urgently, "Father, have you noticed anything strange about Lucy? Anything unusual in her behavior? The little girl no longer seems like herself at all." Father Michael sighed deeply, his eyes filling with genuine concern. "Lucy is such a good, sweet girl, Mrs. Johnson. But lately she maintains this strange, unnatural silence whenever I try to speak with her. Isabel always answers for her immediately, claiming she's just shy. But I feel in my heart that something isn't right." Once, after Mass, I saw Lucy standing completely alone in the yard, watching David in Isabel's arms with such profound sadness in her eyes, a sadness no child should ever know. He paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully, then continued, "Isabel once told me, quite proudly, that you have to raise children with a firm hand or they'll become spoiled and undisciplined. But I've watched her pamper David excessively, constantly giving him candy and expensive toys, always holding and kissing him. And Lucy, it's as if she doesn't exist, as if she's invisible, a ghost in her own home." Father Michael's words confirmed everything Lucy had already told me, everything I had feared in the deepest corners of my heart. A devastating mix of rage and powerlessness swept over me in crushing waves. I thanked the priest solemnly, promised to return soon, and left the church with renewed determination burning in my chest. On my way back home, I stopped at the corner store and bought a large bag of colorful candy, desperately hoping to give Lucy even a small moment of simple joy. But when I gave her the bag that afternoon, the little girl stared at it for an impossibly long time and asked with heartbreaking uncertainty, "Grandma, can I have one?" That simple, devastating question was the clearest and most painful proof of everything I had heard throughout the day. I nodded, barely holding back the tears threatening to overflow. "Eat them, my darling. Eat as many as you want. They're all yours." Lucy opened the bag with extreme care, took only one single piece of candy, and then carefully placed the rest in a drawer as if she was terrified someone would catch her and punish her for her greed. That image tore me completely apart. The psychological repression had cut so deep into her soul that even this tiny, insignificant joy required explicit permission. I sat down beside her and stroked her soft hair with infinite tenderness. "Lucy, sweetheart, what flavor do you like best? Next time, Grandma will buy you a whole bag of just that flavor." She looked up, and I saw the smallest sparkle beginning to return to her eyes. "Strawberry, Grandma. I like strawberry best." But she immediately lowered her head and whispered so softly I could barely hear, "But I don't need many, Grandma. Just one is enough for me." Those words made me burst into tears that I couldn't stop, couldn't control. I hugged her with desperate strength and whispered fiercely, "You deserve to eat the entire bag, my precious girl. You deserve everything good and sweet in this world. Grandma won't let you be afraid ever again, I promise you." That night, I made a simple but warm dinner, fluffy Spanish omelette and fresh salad, which Lucy used to love so much before this nightmare began. When I placed the plate before her, she looked at me with lingering doubts swimming in her eyes. "Grandma, can I eat?" I nodded, smiling through my pain. "Eat, my honey. Enjoy every single bite." This time, Lucy ate slowly but steadily, and her gaze was no longer quite so tense, quite so fearful. I watched her from across the table, my heart torn between devastating pain and fierce determination. Everything Mrs. Miller and Father Michael had told me, combined with Lucy's own terrified confessions, had given me more than enough reason to act decisively. I lay down next to Lucy that night, listening to her quiet, peaceful breathing as she slept. But inside, I couldn't find any peace at all. I thought about Isabel, her fake, poisonous smile, the masterful way she had built the perfect image of a devoted mother in front of everyone. I thought about my son Anthony, who was perhaps still completely blind to the horrifying truth happening under his own roof. And I thought about Lucy, that small, innocent child who had been enduring wounds that nobody knew about, suffering in silence. I clenched my fist tightly and told myself in the darkness, with absolute conviction, when Anthony and Isabel return, I will not let this silence continue for even one more day. I will confront them directly for Lucy, for my own blood, and for the justice she absolutely deserves. The confrontation that weekend, as the sun slowly set over the narrow street in front of my house, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, I heard Anthony's familiar car horn. I stood at the door, my heart pounding violently against my ribs, knowing with absolute certainty that this day would not be like any other. This day would change everything. The old car stopped directly in front of my gate. Anthony climbed out, his face tired and worn, but his eyes lit up with happiness as he looked toward the entrance. Isabel followed behind him, carrying David in her arms. The baby was moving restlessly, babbling innocent sounds that seemed to mock the darkness I was about to expose. I took Lucy's small hand and led her with me to the door, feeling her tiny hand tighten desperately against mine, as if she were desperately searching for a safe place to anchor herself. Anthony bent down, opening his arms wide with genuine love. "Lucy, come here, sweetheart. Daddy missed you so much." But Lucy just clung to me with desperate strength, her big eyes looking at him with unmistakable fear. She allowed herself to be hugged for just the briefest moment and then immediately pulled away. Stepping back to hide protectively behind me, I looked at my son, my heart sinking as I watched surprise and hurt flicker across his confused face. Isabel swept in immediately, placing a decorative gift bag on my table, smiling that brilliant, poisonous smile. "Mom, I brought some excellent wine and typical pastries from Toledo. You simply must try them. They're absolutely delicious." She spoke with such enthusiasm, such apparent warmth, as if everything was perfectly fine, as if she hadn't been systematically torturing my granddaughter, while Isabel busied herself bragging about the trip, talking animatedly about the colorful markets in Toledo and all the wonderful foods they had tried. I looked at Lucy. The little girl was hiding silently behind me, tightly clutching the fabric of my clothes with white knuckles, her gaze fixed firmly on the floor. I felt the terrible tension in her small body and knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't stay silent for even one more second. When everyone sat down at the table for the meal of stew and salad I had prepared, hoping desperately to create some semblance of a warm atmosphere, he took a deep, steadying breath, looked directly at Anthony, and said clearly, "Son, do you have any idea that your daughter has to ask for permission just to have dinner?" The air in the room suddenly grew impossibly heavy, suffocating. Anthony froze completely, his fork suspended in midair. He looked at me in complete shock and then turned to Isabel, his eyes swimming with confusion. "Mom, what are you talking about? What do you mean?" Isabel, maintaining her perfect composure, placed her wine glass carefully on the table and smiled that faint, dismissive smile. "That's absolutely right, Mom. Children need to be properly disciplined. Eating is a privilege that must be earned, not an automatic right. I simply want Lucy to learn real discipline and respect. Surely you understand that." Her voice was soft, almost reasonable, but each word was like a knife stabbing into my heart, twisting viciously. I couldn't contain my fury for even one more second. I slammed my hand violently on the table, making the dishes rattle, my voice trembling with volcanic rage. "That's not discipline, Isabel. That's abuse. That's torture. The little girl is only 7 years old. How can you possibly call it discipline to force a child to ask permission to eat food, to deny her meals as punishment?" Anthony frowned deeply, his tone growing tense and defensive. "Mom, maybe you're misunderstanding the situation. Isabel has always taken such wonderful care of Lucy. The girl has been so much more obedient since Isabel started looking after her properly." My son's words felt like a betrayal, a devastating blow that made me realize Anthony was still completely blind to the truth happening right in front of his eyes. Isabel immediately took her husband's hand, squeezing it, her voice softening as if she wanted to calm the situation and paint herself as the reasonable one. "You're absolutely right, Anthony, my love. I just want to raise our daughter with a firm hand so she grows up to be a better person. David will be raised exactly the same way. Consistency is so important." I pointed at Lucy with a trembling finger. The little girl was sitting completely motionless, her eyes red and swollen, the plate of rice sitting completely untouched in front of her. "Look at her," I almost screamed, my voice breaking with unbearable pain. "Just look at your daughter. She's terrified even to sit at this table. That's the result of the discipline you're defending, Isabel." Anthony turned slowly to look at his daughter, but Lucy kept her head bowed low, her hands clenched into tight fists under the table, not daring to speak a single word or raise her eyes. The atmosphere in the room became absolutely suffocating, as if everything was balanced on the verge of complete collapse. David, sitting contentedly on Isabel's lap, babbled cheerfully, "Mommy," and she immediately picked him up, stroking him lovingly, kissing his forehead. That gesture only widened the devastating gap between the two children, making the injustice impossible to ignore. I looked at David, smiling without any care in the world, completely loved and secure. And then I looked at Lucy, trembling in terrified silence, invisible and abandoned. My heart felt torn completely apart, not just for Lucy, but also for Anthony, who was trapped in a truth he desperately didn't want to acknowledge. Anthony remained silent, his face full of confusion and conflict. He looked at me, then at Lucy, and then back at Isabel, as if he didn't know whom to trust, whom to believe. I wanted to scream, to tell him absolutely everything Lucy had confessed, everything Mrs. Miller and Father Michael had witnessed with their own eyes. But I knew that if I revealed everything at that exact moment, Anthony might not believe me. He loved Isabel deeply, and that love had completely blinded him to his own daughter's wounds. Isabel, as if sensing the dangerous tension in the room, stood up abruptly, took David firmly in her arms, and said in a cold, cutting voice, "The way we choose to raise our children is a private family matter. Outsiders have no right to intervene, not even you, Mom. We're leaving now. I'll return tomorrow to pick up Lucy." Her words were like a final, devastating blow. I squeezed Lucy's hand with desperate strength, feeling her small hand trembling violently in mine. I looked at Isabel, who was carrying David with one arm and pulling Anthony toward the door with the other, and I knew in my heart with absolute conviction that I had made my final decision. I would not let this truth be buried. I would not let Lucy continue to live in fear for even one more day. When the door finally closed behind them, I turned to Lucy and hugged her with all my strength. "It's okay now, my precious love. Grandma won't let you go back to that terrible place. I promise you." The little girl nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks, but with a slightly brighter, more hopeful look flickering in her eyes, as if she had finally found a tiny spark of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Taking action the next morning, I woke up with my heart pounding violently, filled with crushing anxiety at the thought of Anthony and Isabel returning for Lucy. I prepared breakfast for her, desperately trying to make everything seem normal and safe. But every time I looked at those big, haunted eyes, I saw that the fear was still hiding there, lurking just beneath the surface. While I was washing the dishes, trying to calm my racing thoughts, a car horn suddenly blared loudly at my entrance. My heart sped up painfully. They had arrived. I opened the door and saw Anthony climbing out of his old car, his gaze tired but forced into a smile. Isabel was behind him with David secured in her arms. The child was yawning peacefully, calm and content in his mother's embrace. Anthony called out loudly, enthusiasm ringing in his voice, "Lucy, get your things, sweetheart. We're going home now." But I looked at Lucy, sitting frozen in the living room, hugging her worn-out rag doll with desperate strength. She was trembling visibly as she heard her father's voice. Her little face was deathly pale, her eyes wide with absolute panic. I took her hand gently but firmly. "It's okay, my love. Grandma is here. I won't let anything happen to you." Isabel put David down on the couch, her voice cold and sharp, almost a command. "Hurry up, Lucy. Don't keep your father waiting." I was startled, recognizing instantly that this was exactly the same way she used to speak to the little girl at home. Not the voice of a loving mother, but the voice of someone who wants complete control, who demands obedience. Lucy backed away instinctively, hiding protectively behind me, her small hand squeezing my blouse tightly as if clinging to a lifeline. Anthony came closer, extending his hand with a genuinely soft voice. "Come on, honey. Daddy misses you so much. Let's go home." But Lucy didn't move forward even an inch. She burst into tears, her voice broken and desperate. "Grandma, please, I don't want to go. I'm so scared. Please don't make me go back." Those words were like lightning striking directly through the room. Anthony froze completely, his hands suspended uselessly in the air, his eyes flooding with confusion and pain. Isabel frowned deeply, her voice harsh and impatient. "Lucy, stop making this ridiculous scene right now. We're going home immediately." But that commanding tone only made Lucy cry harder, more desperately. Her little body shook violently as she buried her face in my shoulder, her sobs tearing at my heart. I picked her up, clearly feeling her heart beating wildly like a trapped bird. I turned to Anthony, my voice firm, loaded with barely contained rage. "Enough, Anthony. Enough of this. You have to face the truth right now. Your daughter is absolutely terrified to go back to her own home. Don't you see that? Anthony tried to kneel down to talk to his daughter, to comfort her. But Lucy only buried herself deeper into my shoulder, not daring to look at him, as if he had become part of the threat. Isabel pushed David's hand away roughly as he tugged innocently on his father's shirt. She scooped him up as if he were a shield to hide behind, her eyes icy and hard. Mrs. Johnson is completely exaggerating. Lucy is just throwing a childish tantrum. This is ridiculous. But I couldn't bear that poisonous lie for even one more second. The air in the room was so tense it seemed ready to shatter into pieces. And I knew it was finally time to act decisively. I took out my phone right in front of Anthony and Isabel. I dialed Ellen, a lawyer friend I trusted completely. Ellen, I need your help immediately. My granddaughter is in serious danger, I said in a trembling but absolutely firm voice. I immediately called social services next. I explained briefly but with crystal clarity. My granddaughter Lucy is being abused in her own home. I need you to intervene right now. This is urgent. Isabel screamed in a shrill, panicked tone. What in God's name do you think you're doing? This is a private family matter. But I stood directly between her and Lucy, answering harshly, my voice like steel. No, Isabel, this is no longer a family matter. This is a legal matter. I'm not going to let you do whatever you want with my granddaughter for even one more day. Anthony stood there completely frozen, confused and lost. He pulled out a cigarette with trembling hands, but his hands shook so violently he couldn't even light it. He looked at me, then at Lucy, his eyes full of terrible anguish. Mom, what's happening? Please explain this to me. But before I could answer, the piercing siren of an official vehicle echoed from the entrance. Barely 20 minutes later, 2 professional social workers entered my home, along with a local police officer. The whole neighborhood began to whisper and stare. Curious neighbors watched from a safe distance, their faces filled with shock. A social worker, a woman with a small build but a remarkably gentle voice, knelt carefully in front of Lucy. Hi, sweetheart. My name is Anna. Can you tell me what's happening? I'm here to help you. You're safe now. Lucy squeezed my hand with desperate strength, still trembling violently, but my steady, encouraging look gave her courage. She nodded slowly and said in a low, broken voice, if I'm not good, if I make mistakes, Mommy Isabel won't let me eat. One day, everyone ate this beautiful paella, and I could only watch them. She also locked me in a dark room when I broke a glass by accident. It was so dark. I was so scared and alone. Each word was a direct blow against Anthony. He turned deathly pale, his hands trembling so violently he dropped his unlit cigarette onto the floor. Isabel tried desperately to defend herself, her voice rising with panic. It's all lies, complete lies. I've just been a little strict with the girl to teach her discipline. Lucy, tell everyone you're lying. Tell them right now. But Lucy's terrified expression and the tears rolling down her pale cheeks were the most compelling, devastating accusation imaginable. The social worker took careful notes and then turned to me with professional concern. Mrs. Johnson, we're going to need much more detailed information. The girl will stay with you temporarily while we investigate. Is that acceptable? I nodded firmly. I hugged Lucy tightly and felt her small body slowly, gradually beginning to relax in my protective arms. When the social worker and police officer finally left, Isabel carried David toward the car with jerky, angry movements. She turned to glare at me, her eyes blazing with pure hatred. You're going to regret this, Johnson. You'll be sorry you ever did this. But I wasn't afraid of her threats. Not anymore. I looked her directly in the eyes and replied with absolute conviction. I only regret one thing, Isabel not acting sooner to save my granddaughter from you. Anthony didn't say anything at all. He just lowered his head in shame and walked silently after Isabel. But I knew that in his heart, devastating justice arrives that same day. The police filed an official report. Isabel was taken to the station for intensive investigation. Her face was twisted with panic. Even though she desperately tried to seem calm and innocent, Anthony accompanied her, his face absolutely haggard, as if his entire world had collapsed around him and he was standing in the ruins. I watched my son leave my house, and I felt a gut-wrenching pain tearing through me. I knew Anthony loved Isabel deeply, but I also knew he loved Lucy more than anything in this world. He had simply let that love for Isabel blind him completely to his own daughter's wounds. I stayed with Lucy, holding her for hours and hours, comforting her tenderly until she finally fell asleep in my arms. her wet eyelashes closing peacefully in exhausted sleep. In the following days, social services officially allowed Lucy to stay with me temporarily under strict supervision. I did absolutely everything in my power to give her the most normal, loving life possible. Every morning, I took her to school and watched her walk into the classroom with slightly lighter, more confident steps. I started noticing small but significant changes. Lucy was beginning to laugh again when she played with her friends in the playground, though her smile was still somewhat shy and tentative. One afternoon when I picked her up, Lucy actually ran toward me, showing me a clumsy but beautiful drawing she had made. "Grandma, I made this in class today. The teacher said it was very, very pretty." I hugged her tightly, and my heart overflowed with pure joy as I saw her eyes beginning to shine again, even if just for brief, precious moments.